Long time no see. How are we all doing?
Good.
Great.
Great. I might just sort of wait for a minute for everyone to jump on, all those stragglers, before we jump into it, I think. Come on. Luis, where are you based? You're not Melbourne as well, are you? Luis?
Sorry. Yes, in Melbourne.
Oh, you're Melbourne. You're all Melbourne. Okay.
Yeah.
Great.
We're based in Melbourne.
Okay. Excellent. Should I get started? I just hate this bit. We should just start we should all jump on at 5 past or something. It's always so awkward. I might just get started and they can keep joining. So for those of you I don't know, my name's Amanda Price. I'm the head of High Growth Ventures. So we're a team within KPMG dedicated to working with startups. Our role is that we connect founders with their teams to the services within KPMG that they need to grow sustainably and scalably. But before we begin this session, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we meet today, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and pay my respects to elders past and present. So a month ago, we launched our new series and it's called Things I Wish I Knew Before I Grew. So on that panel, we had Vu Tran from Go1, we had Michelle Duval from Fingerprints for Success, we had Pete Mycock from Incrementum, and the focus for that one was on sales. And I've got to say, there's no pressure for you guys, of course, but it was an excellent session. Hugely valuable, many insights. It's the only one I've gone back and listened to a couple of times, I've got to say. So I think Kelly's going to put the link in it. So anyone that wants to listen to it, I really recommend you do it. It was great. So for this session, we're going to focus on customer. And what I've done is sort of grouped it in three sort of trenches. So we've got the first one's around the identification, understanding of the customer. Then we go into customer acquisition, and then we'll go into customer retention. This session is designed to be as interactive as possible for the panelists and guests, people listening. I've got an eye on the chat, so if you've got any questions, just put them through, and if I can, I'll weave them in as smoothly as I can. And first, I thought I'd just introduce the panel as well. We've got Luis Malaver-Ortega. How was that? That was pretty good. Pretty good.
It was good. Very close.
Bit of practice there. Thank you very much. Founder of the startup called Me and I noticed that your startup was included in the Australian list of top 100 innovators as well. So congratulations for that.
Thank you very much.
This took me a while to practice too, because you're also a cell and molecular biologist with 18 years experience in the biotech field. Congratulations for that too. And Leigh, hey Leigh, Leigh was the co-founder of Aconex, which was acquired by Oracle in 2018 for 1.6 billion. Leigh grew Aconex to over 200 million in revenue, so I thought he may have some insights to share about customers. He's also on the chair of LaunchVic second quarter and co-founder and CEO of his new startup called Firmable, which is a B2B database that helps customers understand more about leads and customers. We are fortunate enough, I don't know if I'm allowed to say this, but to be one of the beta testers, and it's awesome. So sorry if I wasn't, but it is great. Rachael, hey Rachael, founding partner of Flying Fox Ventures, which is an early stage VC working with founders in Australia and New Zealand. Previously, Rachael was head of AWS, startups for AWS, where she's worked with thousands of startups. But I actually met Rachael years ago when we were both living in the US. I think you were at Eventbrite then, and I used to run programs that took Australian companies over to the US in sort of cohorts, and we'd go over to San Francisco, and we'd sort of set up sessions with a range of experts. And I think I also hit Leigh up for this too, but Rachael came along. Rachael came along, and her session was always on customer. And I always remember the session because the holding slide, the first slide was customer is queen. And I thought it's probably a really good place to start today, Rachael, with you to sort of talk about why in your mind is customer queen, and when did this sort of focus or obsession for you start with customer?
Yeah, and I should mention that holding slide is Beyonce, who is our universal queen.
Well, actually, on that, I should have also mentioned one of the other slides, which I'd like to touch on later, was all customers are liars. So we should get onto that one.
That's true. That's true. We hold them in high regard, but there's a translation layer that's necessary. So listen, customers are our queen because there's no point in us building businesses if not for our customers, right? And hopefully the reason why so many of us get up out of bed every day and do the really hard things is because there's a customer problem that we are desperately trying to solve. So the customer is the center of our universe. But also then if, that's kind of a heart place, but there's this head place too. And one of the things that we know, and this is kind of how my journey in customer started, it started actually when I was a management consultant, which is kind of a dirty word in startups, but I was for my sins at Bain, and I became one of the global experts in NPS, which is the Net Promoter System, which actually looked at unlocking growth by deeply understanding your customer and helping that information be translated into products and services. And so we know 3 things that happen if you are a company that is able to unlock the power of happy customers. 1 is they buy more. 2 is they stay longer, and 3 is they tell their friends. And what that means for us, buying more, that's revenue and ideally more profitability because you've acquired them. Staying longer, so that's a longer lifetime value, and then telling their friends, that's free marketing. And so we have empirical data that says if you're able to unlock these kind of loyalty behaviors, basically you get to grow 2 times faster at 15% lower costs. So like, who doesn't want to do that? And so it's been incredible for me to take those learnings from working with big companies and helping them to unlock that, to working with startups, to really embed it into their DNA from day one, and to figure out how they can become customer obsessed organizations. The other added benefit is that when you have happy customers, you tend to attract people to work for you. And so especially for early stage companies trying to build teams, happy customers make for happy employees who then go ahead and serve happy customers, and you get this virtuous cycle. So I just see that being as not only the kind of raison d'etre, like the reason you exist, but it becomes a magnet for all of these other things that you want to see in your business.
Yeah, and from your perspective, like in the Flying Fox, with your Flying Fox hat on, with all the companies you see, what are you seeing across those companies in terms of, are companies here focused on customers enough? Where are we at in early stage companies with that?
I mean, I'd like to say that at Flying Fox, we have a disproportionate obsession with customer. I don't know if I'm right, but that is really like one of the biggest lens through which I am picking companies. So when I'm meeting a founder, I want to see her or his obsession with the problem rather than their obsession with their solution, especially because I come in so early. So whatever product they have in front of me is not going to be the product that's going to make money or change the world. In fact, it might not even be the thing that will get in front of customers. It's really a proxy for their thinking. It's a proxy for how well does this founder understand the problem, and how is this first version of solution design. And so that's something I really look for. So I'd like to say at Flying Fox, we maybe our companies are maybe disproportionately customer obsessed. But I heard one of my portfolio founders recently give a presentation and she talked about she called it solutionitis, which is when she realized that she was becoming obsessed with the product that she was building and she had lost touch with the problem she was solving. And so I love that term. I don't know if she coined it. It's Lauren Humphrey from the Mintable, but I'm now going to steal it and use it all the time. But whenever a founder pitches to me their solution and talks in terms of the product and the solution at an early stage, I get quite wary around whether or not they will lose their way in the journey.
Yeah. Luis, this might be a good place for you to jump in. I think
yes,
you might want to talk about solutionitis and whether you've experienced that as well.
Yes, well, Rachel actually make a really good point in terms of how we need to align very early in terms of understanding the needs of the customer. And this is especially a big learning for me, being a technical founder that was developing or is developing the technology with the view of satisfying or answering the question coming from the customer. So it's really, really important to have this communication early on in terms of engaging with the customers, and especially in the case of what we are building, making a distinction between who's going to be the customer and who is going to be the user. Because what we are building up right now essentially is going to be the decision of buying or not, accessing to what we're building or not, will be for a person that is not going to be actually getting the benefit of the product. So understanding that dynamics between customers, users, and what you are building early on is quite important.
Can you go into that a bit more around just the customer and the user and the difference? So one's not, I don't know, you said someone's not going to be the benefit. Can you explain that a bit more?
Yes. Well, the decision of accessing our technology will be based on expertise, the pediatricians. So let me tell you a little bit about what we're trying to achieve with the company. So we are an early stage innovation-driven company who is building up a technology that's going to answer the needs of the preterm babies to get the right nutrition. So essentially, we are working the problem from the technical point of view with the view of satisfying that need. Okay, but because the users are the preterm babies, they are not taking the decision on accessing what we're building. So that's why it's very important for us to understand who is going to be the customer, who at the end is going to decide if we are offering a better solution to the existing solutions. But that will be based in the needs of the user, which is going to be the preterm baby. So it actually points out how complex is this interaction and how much you need to understand how all the pieces work together in order to find out what you need to do. What are the blanks that you need to fill in terms of the product or the service that you are building up.
Yeah, gotcha. And Leigh, for you as well, just from the perspective, I'll go into sort of other topics in a sec, but from the perspective of an investor, are you like Rachael, is it sort of core to your thesis that you need to see people really passionate about the product or the user?
Yeah, so the customer's obviously critical. The other thing we're trying to focus on is companies that know who their customer isn't as well. So who's not their customer. And I think one of the traps we fall into, unfortunately, in I think all businesses and entrepreneurs are generally people who want to make things happen and like to say yes, is we try and do too much. And if the biggest mistake I've seen the startups we've invested in, and we made this mistake at Apex repeatedly, particularly when we tried to go into the US, is trying to do too much and actually not saying, well, we've got a suite of customers here. There's 10 people, 10 different personas, 10 different segments that we can serve. But what's the 1, 2, maybe 3, but ideally 1 or 2 segments that we serve better than anybody else? So really understanding who is your customer and where does your product align better to their needs than anybody else's product. But also who shouldn't you be selling to? Because you sell to the wrong customer and they drag your product in all sorts of directions. And one maybe quick way of finding that out, if a customer comes with a whole lot of requirements, that's generally a bad sign that you don't quite fit their needs yet. So we try and encourage our staff not to build anything specifically for one customer. Now, never say never, and there's times when you'll have to do that. But if it happens repeatedly, you just end up chasing shiny balls and following another customer. And ending up with 10 different types of customer is really hard to serve. Ending up with one very tight, ideal customer that you serve brilliantly is much better to build out a business. And then you can do more later, but when you've got scarcity of resources, scarcity of capital, scarcity of people, not enough time in the day, being really focused on who your customer is, I think is what we look for. And again, a lot of startups don't do it particularly well in Australia. I think a lot of, when we use the Aiken example, we did every type of construction project in Australia because it's a small market. When we went to the US, we tried to do the same thing. We didn't need to. We could just pick one sub-vertical and go hard after that and be better at that than anybody else. And it took us, well, probably too long, but took us a couple of years to work that out.
Yeah, I'm actually doing the, I think it's folklore, one of their programs, the revenue chapter, and we started yesterday, and they were talking about exactly that, and the fact that you sort of have to be brave enough to go really narrow at the beginning and really test that out. And I think many of us, myself included with High Growth Ventures, when we started, just tried to sell everything to a really big, broad audience. And so the question in that is, how do you decide on that first, or like, how do you narrow it down to understand which group you should focus on first? Or how do you do that, and what might that group look like? What sort of?
Yeah, maybe if I jump in and the others can comment on this. What we're doing at Firmable, this new business, is we're not trying to go too narrow straight up, but the minute we start getting data, and we're still, we're about to launch the product next week into beta, so still very early, but once you start to get the data to make that decision on who's using you well, and that might be these days, that would be, you can get a lot of that data straight out of your platform if you're a software product. But back when we started Aiken, a lot of that was just conversations because we couldn't get the data on how people use the system other than talking to them and understanding how they use it. So I'm not necessarily saying you narrow day one. You might have to test a few different different types of customers and different personas. But once you start to see repeat business, in an area, that's a good sign that obviously you're helping. I think also trying to define what they're buying for. I think the other thing we found is people don't necessarily buy on features. You might think they do, but often it's on perceived benefits of your product, and that perception can be. You really got to understand that. So, to use the Aiken example, we worked out it wasn't a particular type of project, but a perceived problem with risk. They really wanted to manage risk. So if we could find somebody who was uncomfortable with the risk they were bearing on that next project. And what that meant for us, or for them, was that generally doing something new, like I'm doing a project in a different region or a different type of project. And so then we worked out, you have to try and, for us, Aconex to sell, we had to find people that have this perceived problem around risk, and perception that we could solve it for them, of course. So, so sort of an emotive sale, and then what would happen is you'd bring in the ROI, etc., to prove it up later. But yeah, but look, it's not easy. I mean, if this was easy, this is why so many startups fail, right? Because they don't quite get it right. They try to do too many things. They get the wrong customer. But the businesses that do grow through, from 1 to 10 million ARR plus have found a customer they can just repeatedly sell to.
Yeah, Rachel, when you were you brought Eventbrite into Australia, so can you talk through some of the ways? How did you identify the customer? Who did you target? Can you talk through sort of that piece?
Yeah, and so for us, we had 3 things that we looked for, and that is someone that has a very acute, painful problem. It happens with high frequency, and the current solution set is insufficient. So those were kind of the 3 dimensions we looked for. And Eventbrite, for those who don't know, it's a platform where event organizers can either sell tickets or attract people to their event. And for the consumer, it's a place where you can discover things to do and seamlessly enjoy yourself in kind of real life activities. And so when we came to Australia using those 3 dimensions, we looked for who is high frequency. So there were a few customers that were high frequency event creators, places like the Corner Hotel that had, music multiple times a week. We looked at festivals like the Melbourne Food and Wine festivals, which is one of our first major customers. And that is because even though it happened once a year, it was an umbrella event with dozens of sub events underneath. And when we looked at the current solution set for those and that kind of fell into those 2 categories, we knew that we had a product that can alleviate their pain 10 times better than their current solution, which in many times was a pencil and paper. And which we should often remember that sometimes the alternative is not like another solution. It's like someone can just do it pencil and paper better, or there's a do nothing. Like we should never ignore the do nothing, because if the do nothing is certainly not as good as your solution, but it isn't that much worse, then people are going to pick do nothing very, very often. So yeah, we looked for those customers, and one of the strategic thoughts that we had also with say Melbourne Food and Wine Festival was that if we got them as a customer, like I said, they had dozens of events that were under the umbrella. And so those people themselves are event organizers. And so we looked for where we could have this kind of flywheel effect where we land one customer, we inherently then get 30 to 40 sub customers, and there's a large consumer base that will come to those events, and they themselves will turn into multiple purchasers. We also had this secret sauce at Eventbrite. It's not a secret anymore, which is why I feel like I can share it, where we called it ATO, which is attendee turned organizer. And we had this uncanny ability to take someone who just attended a food and wine festival and ask them, what do you love? And, oh, you love pickling? Why don't you have a pickling workshop? And this is a great self-service platform where you can get 10 people to attend your pickling workshop. And that's that kind of second viral loop that we were able to unlock, which meant if we get some of these big events, which would acquire more organizers, which would hit a large number of consumers, we can then convert those secondary organizers into customers, and we can turn those attendees into ongoing consumers and into organizers themselves. So once you figure out that you have this potential for this viral loop, we can then build out both the features and the marketing around those behaviors, and that's how you get exponential growth.
And were the customers that you targeted at the beginning, this is to all of you actually, I'd be interested to understand how, if you had the experience of that customer changing over time, and what was the information you used to sort of either get narrower or change?
I would like to add for that. Well, because we are trying to actually devise our solution based on the needs of the customer, for us has been really, really important. Interviewing and doing surveys through the customer, so we understand the technical requirements of our products. And what we're doing is that because we are playing with the cost benefit of what we're building. So there is a top standard that everyone will love to achieve, but there is also the factor of how much people will be willing to pay for that top standard. So what we're trying to find is that middle term between what is the minimal viable product that we can build up and is going to actually answer the question, answer the needs of the customer. So interviewing, doing surveys, coming back, prototyping and conceptualizing what is going to be the product, and going back to the customer and running those hypotheses over and over again has been really, really valuable for us to actually find out that the level of complexity or the level of sophistication that we were trying to build, because was our vision, was different to actually the requirements of the customer. So it's not that difficult to satisfy their needs. And at the end, what we're trying was to build something too costly that can be done cheaper, because that's essentially what the customer were looking for.
And Luis, how did you do? Did you actually do the surveys? Did you do them? Like, obviously your organization was quite small. Like, who did them? Was it you? Was it in person? Like, what was the best way? What was the best way to get that information?
So essentially, what we're trying to, we are mining the information through the pediatricians and nutritionists and people who is taking care of the preterm baby health. And we have wonderful nutritionist that is actually doing the interviews, Rachael, and she go and talk directly with the pediatrician. She has access to that niche, and then based on the information, based on some technical requirements of the product, we start putting together what is going to be a prototype, what is going to be, what we want to produce, and then going back and tell, look, this is what we have built. What else do we need to put it? And also everything in the context of the price, how much you are able to charge, which is actually a factor that is really, really important to maintain in top of your mind, when you're building this. You always have this vision of what you can achieve. And now I'm talking as a technical founder, you know how much you can achieve in terms of the technology and how sophisticated it can be, but there is also the cost of going to that level of sophistication that you need to lower a little bit to actually make it a profitable or accessible product to the customers.
Leigh, have you got any comments on that?
Yeah, I think well, maybe going back to that other question, so customers, how they evolve for us over time. We started thinking we were selling to contractors at Aconex, and then we broadened out to developers. But perhaps going back to Luis's comments before about the user, we also had people who didn't pay for our product, but we needed to keep happy. So they weren't our paying customer, but we had to, partly because we're building a network of people to do construction projects. If we didn't have good feedback from the subcontractors and the consultants, the architects, the engineers, etc., we wouldn't be able to sell to the head contractors and the owners. So sort of how we thought about, we actually call them non-paying customers. So we sort of got to the point of saying they're still a customer, but just don't have to be paying, but they're part of our rather than just calling them, they're all users. We said, well, no, they're non-paying customers, and so it sort of got us thinking about them as a customer, not just a pure user. But then the other thing is so the person that would pay for our product wasn't the core user as well. So that then it gets very tricky, because you've got to have a message for the person who's going to write the check, and in our case that would have been the project director or the CFO, but then it was the document controllers and the people on site and everybody else that was using the product. So it gets quite complex, but just very much understanding. And the other thing I'd say, just on sort of trying to know your customer, we never stopped having that discussion, even after nearly 20 years of running the business, about who our customer was, and continually trying to refine it as to, well, why do they buy? How do we get to more of them? How many people look like that? Who are the buyers that we need to keep a track of? So this is back, this is before you could really do this easily, but we track people on LinkedIn. We sort of get our top 2,000 or 3,000 influencers, we call them, or buyers. So these are people who bought Aconex in the past. The minute they move to another company, or another project, we were all over them. So we had a part of our team, we had quite a big team in India. So we had some of the team there just tracking them manually. There was no way to do this on an automated basis, but just tracking them manually. So lots of ways you can access them, but it's the main point there. It's just never stop refining who your customer is, and you're always learning more and making mistakes and learning from that and what works and what doesn't, and getting your messaging. I mean, messaging was the thing that the reason we kept going back to the customers. I don't think we ever quite cracked our messaging, at least to the degree that we thought we needed to. So it was always a work in progress. How do we better sell better message, top of funnel, and then sell down through the funnel?
Yeah. Rachel, on that, I think one of the stories I remember you telling too, and it might have been around the customers alive slide, I'm not quite sure, but it was like, it was the example you used where you went and watched how customers interacted with the product. Do you remember that?
Yeah. Well, there's one thing I want to just follow on with what Luis and Leigh were saying, which is your customers will always evolve, because either their world will continue to evolve, or once you solve a problem, the next one will pop up. So your job is never done as a service provider, because it's a whack-a-mole. And so I always go back to Clay Christensen has the theory. He was a HBS professor. He died a little while ago, but he had this jobs to be done theory. And he always said, there's no such thing as a product. There is just a job to be done. And then you rent that product to get the job done. And if it keeps getting that job done, you'll hire it again. And if it doesn't get the job done, you will hire a different alternative. And so it means that customers are constantly going back, even if it's mentally, and even if you have them locked in a contract, they keep wondering, is this product the right thing that I should be hiring to get this job done? And so if it gets it done, then there's another job to do. And this is why it's so important to have these tight feedback loops where you are hearing your customer and you are trying to figure out what is their pain point now. It's either a refinement of what I thought it was, or now it's a whole new pain point because I so completely and beautifully solved the first one. And so you want to have these tight feedback loops where you're hearing your customer and you're quickly turning that into new products or services, and then measuring to see whether that's, moving the dial. So that's where, unfortunately, I always say this is a continuous journey. And that's why I encourage, especially early stage startups, to build up this muscle early, because having that continuous feedback loop is something that you want to both have the mentality, the tools, and embed those processes as early as possible. So that's the first thing. The customers that are liars. I say that to be provocative, and I guess it worked because you remembered it. That's actually talking about the fact that humans, as good of people as we are, we have something called an intention behavior gap. And that means what we say we're going to do and what we do actually has no statistical correlation. It has an R value of 0.3, which for those, nerds like me in the room means it is not correlated. And we know this to be true because I can ask any of you, how likely are you to go to the gym this week? And 75 of you will put your hand up. And if I ask you how many actually went to the gym or worked out last week, that's a very different number. And it doesn't mean we're bad. It just means that we have this cognitive dissonance in ourselves where we have trouble predicting our behaviors. And so the advice that I give folks then is not to ask, would you buy this? Because everyone, either because they have good intention or because they want to make you happy or because it seems cool at the time, will say, I would totally buy this. And then you go ahead and build a product, and then you wonder where your customers are. And so what I suggest is, one, you look at anecdotal evidence. What does the data show about similar behaviors that I can infer that it might be the same in this case? Or if it's new and novel and you really can't look at past performance as an indicator of future performance, you do observations. So I have a bunch of observational methodologies that I've used, but it's really trying to collect as much behavioral data as possible, and you build off of that rather than asking them to self-declare, because unfortunately they're accidental liars.
Right. We might change on to sort of actually, before that, I was going to say, one of the things that we use a methodology for sales and marketing called Winning by Design. And there's a thing in that called SPICE. And SPICE is situation, problem, impact, and critical event. And so what we do, it takes a bit of time, but we go through let's say every month, we might go through every customer who bought, let's say, R&D. And you run that through. What was the situation they're in? What was the problem? What's the impact that problem's having? And what's the critical event that's caused them to come to us or whatever? So we do that. Let's say 20 people have bought that in a month. Over time, you can start to get really clear on, there might be 10 people had the same situation, or there might be, so you start going through all of this and you can get really narrow on who you're targeting and why you're targeting. So we found that was a bit of a game changer for us, actually. Again, it's one of those things that takes quite a bit of time, but I think it's been super helpful to understand that. And also then that obviously impacts you, as you touched on before, your messaging, Leigh, because it really has helped us to guide that and continue to build on that as we continue to understand the customer better. So that's been sort of great for us. So customer acquisition, obviously there's been a huge amount of focus on customer acquisition over before the last 18 months, which is sort of, not that there's not a focus, but I think there's more of a growth at all costs type mentality around that. And probably just Rachael and Leigh, just out of interest on that, now that there's been a bit of quite a significant change in the market, let's say for the last 12, 18 months, and we've moved from this sort of growth at all costs to efficient growth. And obviously growth at all costs, there was a big focus on acquisition. What's sort of changed in that? I mean, when you've got a lot of money, you just start acquiring, you can do a lot of things, spend. When you've got less money, I suppose you have to really look at what are the most effective pathways for acquisition for you. And obviously that's different for different businesses, but it might be interesting just to sort of hear a little bit from your perspective of what you're seeing out there. How have some of these founders changed their businesses, and what are they doing that's worked or not?
I'll kick off. I think I think you said, some of it, if you go back 2 years ago, as growth at any cost, it just didn't matter how much it was costing. And I think, that unfortunately breeds a whole lot of bad habits in the way people were acquiring customers. Businesses were acquiring customers. I think the flip to, when arguably a good investor should always look at the metrics and are you getting efficient growth? And I think if you haven't got efficient customer acquisition, if you're not tracking that, really hard for somebody to invest in the business. I think, for me, it's less of, are you growing at 30% or 60% or 90%? It really doesn't, the growth rate's less important than is it efficient, is it sustainable, and what does it look like over time for that business? So if I'm getting good LTV to CAC, then I should keep investing in sales. If it's not, well, I've got to work out, if I'm not getting the right metrics, I've got to work out what I'm doing. And different businesses have different profiles as to whether the next incremental customer is going to be cheaper or more efficient to acquire than the previous customer. And perhaps to give you an example, when we were looking at markets to grow Aconex, we were trying to work out how many salespeople do we need in the US, in China, in Germany, wherever it was, Middle East, whatever. We were trying to get to where if the sales guys weren't selling efficiently, so if that team wasn't selling efficiently, then we'd be better to take that dollar from that region and put it in another region where they were more effective. So we were sort of weighing the regions against each other. So, well, where do we get the most efficient spend for our dollar? And that incremental customer sometimes just isn't worth it. If that customer, or if you're pushing up against adoption. So the other thing we'd look at is say, well, do we think there's more room for adoption within that market? Therefore, we can spend there. But if we're hitting an adoption limit, if the customers are becoming too hard to sell to. Perhaps another example is just on B2C businesses, particularly if you're some of the digital consumer businesses that are selling whatever the product is. There's a certain the first customers are often the easiest because they're trawling around online looking for your product. So, but as you get further into the market, it can often get harder, which has a different characteristic to a network-driven business. As Rachael was saying before with Eventbrite, that seems a little bit like Aconex. It actually got easier over time to sell because we were using the network to drive more growth. So just understanding how your business model plays out over time and whether you're getting more efficient or less efficient as you kind of push into the market. That was something we tried to track and keep an eye on.
Yeah. Rach?
I mean, I think that Leigh said that beautifully. The only thing I'll add is I think sometimes our founders forget some like really basic business 101 equations. So like the profitability equation is revenue minus cost, and revenue is number of units and price, and cost is both fixed and variable. And then we can think about what are the levers that I have to either drive revenue or to reduce costs to ultimately become profitable, either in a unit economics perspective or for customers. And so if we just think quickly out loud around some of the things we've talked about already this half hour, we can increase revenue if we are picking the right customer and we're solving the right problem, and we continue to solve his or her problem. That is more revenue over time. And then costs go down because we're not acquiring new customers and have a leaky bucket. We're getting efficiencies in how we sell. They're buying more for the same amount of, call it like account executive or account management time. And even better, they're telling their friends. And so that's revenue that you're getting at a zero CAC. And so there's so much, like if we just remember to think about those two sides of the profitability equation, we can think about what can we do to increase revenue? What can we do to systematically reduce our costs? And, to Leigh's point, that is around figuring out internal efficiencies and then unlocking the power of, a great product or service that someone loves, and they're staying longer, spending more, they're their price sensitivity, goes down. And I think about some of, my great customers, and I think because we're kind of talking about an enterprise sales model right now, like I think about Capiche, which is they actually do natural language processing for large swaths of customer data to help companies figure out the products and services they should be offering. But one of the things that I love about this company is that I see their average contract value is just continuing to go up. And that's not just because they're getting bigger companies, it's because they're actually increasing their prices and the existing customers are not churning. And that just shows that they're continuing to solve a problem and continuing to add so much value. So the net retained revenue per customer is actually over 100%. And that is a sign where you have both your product market fit and you found your right customer. So knowing what the metrics are, watching how they're tracking, and then understanding what are the levers that you have to try and move the dial on those metrics are really powerful. When founders come to me, even at the early stages of their journey, with a strong command of like, these are the metrics that matter in my business. This is how these are my levers and these are the experiments I'm going to run. That shows me that they're set up well to not just figure it out, but to continue to figure it out as things change and evolve.
And do you see many, just again from an investor point of view, the people going through, like, do you delve into if they're looking at when won and lost, like actually reviewing won and lost customers and what they're learning from all of that, and see value in that?
Yeah, I do. So I look at two things from that. One is I look at, every month when I ask them to kind of give us just an update on how they're going, I look for their revenue, but then I look for what their revenue target was. And for me, that's not because I want to like whip them because they're missing it or even exceeding it. That's helping me to understand, one, like, is the problem in your forecasting? Like, do we need to figure out how you project out what revenue is going to be? Do we need to talk about kind of pipeline coverage and kind of sales hygiene? So how often are you hitting? As a proxy for just like, do you understand the planning process? But then I always ask, and actually I just asked it yesterday in a first call, so not in a portfolio company, but in a DD call. I said, when you lose, what is your biggest objection when you lose? And what I'm trying to understand is, how are you stacking up against the competitive set? Or how are you landing your ICP or your messaging, and whether or not that's received? Or is your product missing something critical that you're not landing? So it's either the competitive set is either, better, you're not standing out from it, you are not communicating what makes you unique, or you just actually don't have the feature set that you need to solve this problem. And so I love asking that question, because actually in this case, the answer was actually they do nothing, which was a big like aha moment for me to question whether or not they will have success. This is actually in the construction industry, Leigh, so you can imagine how much do nothing there is in many instances. But I love asking that question because it unlocks opportunities for us to work together to try and figure it out.
Yeah, it's one of the things we had, just especially when we started, it's such a small team. Obviously, we knew that getting that customer feedback was really important, but it was just hard to find the resourcing to do that. And so it was like trying to think about what is the most effective way to do that. And as we touched on, Luis, we can go and speak to clients, and we do that. But we tried to use like surveys and tools and all that. So for us, it just wasn't that. We just couldn't get the level of data back that we required. Have you come across any good tools that sort of automate this in an effective way?
Are you asking me, Amanda?
Anyone, yeah.
Yeah, I'll start, and then I'd love the other panelists to chime in. So the best tool you have is this. This is a telephone. I actually hate picking it up, but it's highly effective when you do it, especially in the early days. If you only have a handful of customers, just actually saying, hey, it would mean a lot to me. Like, I am working my guts out to try and make you the happiest customer on earth. I'm trying to build a product that's exactly what you need. Can I get some of your time? And if you pitch it as like, one, you're the center of my universe, you matter so much that I want to hear from you, and I'm going to take this feedback, I'm going to turn to a great product, I'm going to tell you how you helped, and you are a superstar, right? Everyone wants to, one, feel seen, two, feel involved, and three, feel like a superstar. So you play a little psychological game there to make them feel important. And then we always, at Eventbrite, even when we're doing this at scale, when we had thousands of people giving us feature requests, once we put that feature into play, we wrote back to them in an automated way saying, hey, you asked for this feature, we did it, check it out, and you rock. Like, you're the ones who make this product awesome. So, in the early days, don't be afraid to ask. Very often we would have, we call them design customers, and you sometimes give the product away for free. Say, like, it would be so meaningful if you help me to build this. In exchange, we'll reduce your contract or give you X, Y, and Z. When we go at scale, so at Eventbrite, we had millions of customers around the world. We would use NPS surveys that were triggered by very key events in the journey. We use a company called Delighted, but Ask Nicely is a company out of New Zealand that does the same. I come from an NPS background, but I'm not married to that model. I'm just married to any kind of process that you can adopt internally that is continuously getting information, translating it, because another thing I also believe is that customers are really bad product designers. So if a product, customer says, hey, I want this button to be red, don't make it red. Ask, what are they trying to say? They're trying to say, I'm lost. I don't know what to do in this flow. Help me know what my call to action is. Don't take what they say on face value. That's why, a small percentage of us in the world are product designers. Your customers are not. So as long as you have this tool for hearing from your customers, translating it, spitting something out in the world and remeasuring, that's all cool with me. And then, of course, like, now we have technology. If you are a web-based product where, there are tracking pixels or other data analytics that literally show how people navigate your product. So that's just to say, think about how you can gather information based on who your customer is and how big that customer base is. But, when in doubt, pick up the phone.
Great.
Yeah, agree with all of that. I mean, particularly in the early stages, just talking to people. I think some companies, think that they want to do everything, fully scalable, remote, whatever. But you actually don't want too much scale. You don't want scalability day one, because you don't actually learn from your customer as much as you can by just talking to them. So, I think sometimes a rush to scalability and building for the 10,000 customers means you're actually not engaging with the 10 you've got today. So I think there's a bit of a journey there, and just engaging, customers is exactly what Rachel said. Pick up the phone to people. We used NPS, that was fine. Where you've got tracking through an app, of course, do that. But the other thing is uncovering what customers don't know what they. Sometimes don't know how to tell you what they need, but also you've got to occasionally, and very early in the business, you do this a lot, where you take a punt on something. That's the nature of, you'll say, I think the customers want this. They don't know what they need yet. I'll build it. But then once you've got the product there, then you have to be really clear around, and in building it, you get as much involvement as you can. But once you've got it there, you've absolutely got to just get that feedback from them. They're not going to stay around if you're not putting them first.
Yeah, Luis, so in your journey, how have you evolved the way that did you evolve the way that you sort of got that information from customers? Like what do you ask in your surveys now? Has that sort of changed in any way?
Yes, well, there was first a stage of exploration purely, and it was listening more than actually making questions, getting for example, pediatricians to understand the technology we were building and creating this rapport. Then second stage was more just narrow down precise questions about what can be included or not in the product. And there was also a parallel, journey of discovery that was engaging with key opinion leaders, people who actually drive the science behind. And again, you need to understand that the space we are moving is quite different to a product that's going to be massively used, or that has a lot of customers, so it's going to be out of the shelf. To the point where in our journey, we're still testing the hypothesis if we are going to be a B2B or a B2C kind of business. If it's because it's in the journey, and again, I'm talking about early stages of startups. One of the first questions is how much it's going to cost to do vertical integration, and getting all the things done by ourselves, or if it's making more sense to actually give up or rent the technology or license the technology to a third party. So we definitely have this first stage directly with the pediatricians, where we just listen about what is the pain points for them, what is the expectations, and then a more interactive questionnaire, making the questions, proposing things.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, I think I might just quickly jump to retention. I was just listening along and then forgot the time. Retention is an interesting one for us. We, again, with Winning by Design, I think what they did is showed us, which I think everyone else seems to have known, but we didn't, around the funnel and then turning that into the bow tie. And so it gave us this sort of, acquisition and close, and the other side was all retention. And it was sort of, I think, surprising. It's a lot of work to do retention. It's a different sort of strategy. It's a lot more work that goes into that, but it's incredibly valuable, obviously, to be able to sell to the customers you already have. Leigh, can you talk through, like, with your retention strategy, do you want to talk through how you sort of started to implement that? Because did you start it from the beginning, or is it something that over time that you eventually grew?
Yeah, well, I mean, we did it almost day one because it was so bloody hard to sell somebody that, and once we had a product where people weren't coming and knocking on our door, right? So when we were selling A-Connects, construction people on site were not looking around for a tool to manage their documentation on a project. They were busy running their project. So it was just so hard to get in. Once we got a sale, it was like, right, now we've got to turn that from one project into all their projects. And because we were running a network as well, like, if we served the project well, it would probably lead to our next deal. So we did something unusual, I guess, for a SaaS business. So while we're SaaS, we gave unlimited support. We just said, we'll give you as much training as you want. So we took a view that once somebody became a customer, unless they went out of business, they weren't going anywhere. So I think, went massively over-dialed on support and making sure people stuck, and had our churn was almost non-existent. It was an enterprise sale, so they're bigger customers, so it's a bit different in the small business side of the market. But yeah, I think churn, you have 5% churn, that's 5% you got to sell somewhere else. It's just, if you turn that 5%, if you're getting net revenue retention that's negative, if you can turn that into a plus 10 or plus 20 with your existing customers, and then you can sell 30% new customers, that's driving massive growth. So whereas if you're negative 10 and you then got to sell 40-50% new customer growth to make up for that. So it's just so costly to a business to have churn. And look, sometimes it can't be fixed. Like, there's certain businesses that, in consumer apps, you're going to have people churning off. That's fine. So, but then take a point where you say, right, once I get to 6 months, from there on, we'll manage to convert as much as we can within the period. And again, similar for small businesses. But once they go through a certain gate, we do everything we can to keep them on. So, but it's and well, back in it was costly, but it was hand holding. But every customer that we got to stick was worth so much to us that, and partly also we thought about as network that a node in the network is worth more than just the customer itself. So it was all like an LTV to CAC. For us, the LTV was the rest of the network. So if you get people recommending you into others, then that customer's worth so much to keep on and get them, recommend. You're getting you selling in new deals and new customers for you.
Yeah. I think like one of the, maybe this is me asking a question for our business, but one of the challenges, not challenges, but it's as that retention piece starts to work, it's whether you keep the pressure on acquisition. Where you've only got a small team, you can only have so many people on one side and on the other side. And so it's really thinking about when is it time, but how do you actually look at the business and go, okay, we need to slow down acquisition and then just really focus on revenue. And what are the sort of indicators that would show you it's the time to do that?
Yeah, I think with people, I mean, clearly there's high churn, but the other thing I think with some companies, we fell into this a little bit, but some of the companies we invest in as well, they can flip backwards and forwards. It's almost trying to keep that constant, because if you only go to expansion and get that, and you're not getting new customers, an investor says, well, hang on, you're no longer selling new customers into the business. Have you run out of growth? It's this sort of walk and chew gum kind of thing. You've got to keep the balls in the air. It's, I think the way I think about it is you've got to have a balanced funnel, a balanced sales and marketing engine, through to success, customer success, and you keep it all. Ideally, you're keeping it consistent year to year, period to period, quarter to quarter, whatever your measures are. But keep new customers coming in, and I mean the best thing is you've got new customers and you're expanding existing customers. You've got two growth engines working for you. But one or the other, to the just doing growth and forgetting about the customer, you're going to be having to refill the bucket. Just doing the existing customer and not worrying about new growth means you eventually run out of growth for that customer, and you've got to sort of reignite your sales engine. So I think it's trying to do both and keep them running consistently.
Okay. Rachel, any comment on that?
Lee stole my comment just at the end, and it's a pendulum. It just kind of swings back and forth. Perfect world, you're doing both, filling the top of the funnel, not leaking in the bucket. But what we often see where companies are early and resources are constrained is that they'll work on getting a bunch of customers in. Accidentally, churn will get high because they'll forget about kind of the aftercare. They'll have to quickly figure out how do they patch that bucket. Top of the funnel growth might slow down, and they just have to kind of figure out how do they keep kind of swinging back and forwards. And then once they have kind of this homeostasis, hopefully that also comes with a fresh round of capital, and they figured out the system, and now it's just about replicating it and scaling it. And then, there's this whole bunch of growing pains. But one thing I'll just mention, a book that really helped me kind of early in my customer career was by Tony Hsieh, the founder of Zappos, Delivering Happiness. And he just talks about Zappos is infamous for their unparalleled customer support and customer experience. That's obviously in the retail kind of consumer product space, but they were bought by Amazon for, I think, $1 billion, something along those lines. And he took this premise and infiltrated it throughout the whole company, and that he believes that happy people and happy employees create happy customers. But there were some incredible lessons there that just talked about how surprise and delight at the customer end can retain customers and make them customers for life. And so that's one way to kind of patch up the leaky bucket with straw. There are some great ideas in that book on how you do that.
Great, thank you. I just realized we've got 6 minutes left, so I think I might end with the last question to you all. I might start with you, Luis, on this one. So the question is, what's the one thing you wish you knew about customers before you grew?
Well, we're still in the process of growing, but look, and this is an advice for those technical founders out there, is understanding very early that it's the customer who drives the whole thing. So you came with a vision about what you want to build, but it's the customer at the end, the reason why you are doing this, and understanding what are their needs and what are their pains and how you can offer a solution or a better solution early in your journey will make a huge difference in how possible will be the success at the end.
Excellent. Leigh?
Yeah, it's hard to put one answer on it. I mean, yeah, I think this, we tried to do too much. I think was the one thing I look back on A-Connect, and we just tried to do too much. So in a sense, yeah, I'm going to, take the sort of flip side here. You've got to understanding who your customers and who your customers not was critical to us. And I wish I had have probably said no to a few more customers or potential customers, so I could really focus on the customers that matter to us. This sense of, just because somebody likes you doesn't mean you have to hang out with them, kind of thing. Like this sense of, just because a customer loves your product or wants it, if that isn't efficient to serve that customer. So yeah, I just think, knowing, really being critical around how you segment down your customer base, who your personas you're selling to, not trying to just be everything to everybody, was something that it just meant we lost focus. Yeah.
Rachael?
I mean, this is a bit touchy-feely, but I actually, if I think back for my sins at Eventbrite, for a while, I was running the customer support team. And I actually think we made more lifelong customers when we messed up and flat out said, we're sorry, we really messed up, and it's not going to happen again because of X, Y, and Z, rather than try and like smooth it over or cover our ass or, divert. Like when we fully said, you depended on us, we fucked up, we are sorry, and this is how we're going to be different. We created so much loyalty in those moments. And so I don't want you to underestimate the mea culpa and the authenticity, especially when you're early on. Like, you're going to mess up a lot, and trying to kind of sweep it under the rug and pretend like everything is fine. People can see through that pretty quickly. And all they see is someone who doesn't take responsibility for their mess ups. When you own it, I can't tell you how many times when we just said, I am sorry, you deserve better than what you just got, they wrote back and said, wow, that actually felt really heartfelt. That felt meaningful. Thank you for fessing up. And so, those really human moments when you at the end of the day are connecting with another human, that's when relationships are made. And when you are this huge, with Eventbrite, millions of customers, you actually don't have these moments for intimacy. And so when you're given a moment because someone is mad or something hasn't gone right, that's actually a time for you to build a relationship. And so think about what a relationship means in that moment, and kind of show up and be your best self.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you, guys. That was awesome. It was really, really good. I really appreciate you giving us the time today. Learned loads. So thank you. We do a recording of this, obviously, and it will be on the website afterwards. So if anyone wants to listen again, which I will be doing, it will be there very shortly. But thank you. Thanks again. Really appreciate it. Oh, is there someone? No, that's right. There's someone.